Welcome to the very first deep dive from us here at Reach Law, where we're going to be unpacking complex topics and extracting valuable insights.
We know that it can be a real challenge to stay informed about all of these regulations and things.
Absolutely.
So we are here to guide you
Yeah,
through these intricate landscapes.
definitely. And today we are focusing on a very recent development, the EU's Clean Industrial Deal.
Mm.
It was just announced last week on February 26, 2025.
Right. It's a pretty complex set of initiatives. So our goal today is to break it down for you and highlight the most important takeaways for our listener.
Exactly. At its core, the deal aims to make decarbonization a driver of growth for European industries while also boosting their competitiveness globally.
Yeah, it's a very ambitious plan with a lot of moving pieces. But the EU is focusing on two main sectors: energy-intensive industries like steel and chemicals, and the clean tech sector.
And to achieve these goals, they've outlined 6 key business drivers.
So affordable energy is a big one. Of course, lead markets, then there's
Financing circularity and access to materials, global markets, and skills. Like the list.
It covers a lot of ground. And it also outlines specific actions for a few sectors,
Like
automotive steel and metals and chemicals,
Right.
recognizing their specific challenges and opportunities.
makes sense. So today we'll dig into 3 crucial parts of the deal.
Okay, sounds good.
Circular economy initiatives navigating global markets and fostering lead markets for these clean technologies.
All really important areas.
Absolutely. Starting with lead markets. Can you explain what the EU means by that and how they plan to achieve it?
Well, lead markets are essentially sectors where the EU can become a global frontrunner. They want to create early demand for innovative, clean technologies and products. And this has a few benefits. First, it stimulates innovation. Companies are incentivized to develop cutting-edge solutions if they know there's a market for them. Second, it encourages economies of scale. As production ramps up to meet that demand, costs come down, making these technologies more accessible. And third, it positions European industries as leaders in these emerging sectors, giving them a competitive edge globally.
So how does the EU plan to actually create these lead markets? It sounds like a bit of a chicken and egg problem.
Well, one of their key tools is the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act. And it's going to introduce sustainability and Made in Europe criteria into both public and private procurement processes. So when governments or even private companies are buying goods and services, they'll need to consider the environmental impact and prioritize products made within the EU. This creates a guaranteed market for European companies producing those goods.
So that's a pretty big incentive. Is that all they're doing on the public procurement front?
They're actually planning to go a step further in 2026. They're going to revise the public procurement framework to strengthen those sustainability and Made in Europe criteria. They're really serious about giving those clean products an advantage. And for consumers, they're working on a low-carbon product label. They're starting with steel and then expanding to other sectors.
That will definitely make it easier for consumers to identify and choose more sustainable products. It sounds like there's a lot happening on the lead markets front. Let's move on to circularity and access to materials. The EU is making a big push to secure access to critical raw materials, especially given recent geopolitical events. How does this play into the Clean Industrial Deal?
The EU is definitely taking a two-pronged approach. They're working on securing those critical raw materials and at the same time pushing for a more circular economy. To tackle the materials challenge, they're implementing the Critical Raw Materials Act. Part of that involves setting up an EU Critical Raw Materials Center, which will facilitate joint purchases of critical raw materials. This will give European companies more bargaining power. They're also going to manage strategic stockpiles to cushion against any future supply disruptions.
So it's about diversifying the supply chains and creating a safety net. What about the circular economy aspect?
That's a big focus as well. They're planning to introduce a Circular Economy Act in 2026, which aims to accelerate the transition to a more circular model. Essentially, they want to ensure that scarce materials are used as efficiently as possible. They've even set a target to increase the circular material use rate to 24% by 2030. That's more than double the current rate of 11.8%.
That's quite a jump. What does that actually look like in practice?
It means moving away from a linear take, make, dispose model and shifting towards a system where materials are kept in use for as long as possible. So we're talking about reusing, repairing, remanufacturing, and recycling materials rather than simply discarding them after a single use.
Okay, so that covers the internal focus. How about the global implications of the Clean Industrial Deal? The EU can't achieve these goals in isolation, can they?
You're right. The EU knows that international collaboration is essential. One of their key strategies is the development of clean trade and investment partnerships, or CTIPs.
What exactly are CTIPs?
They're essentially partnerships with countries around the world to diversify supply chains and secure access to those crucial raw materials and clean technologies. Think of it as building alliances to achieve shared sustainability goals.
That makes sense. Are there any other tools they're using on the global front?
They're also looking at the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. This is a way to ensure that the price of imported goods reflects their carbon footprint.
So it's a way to level the playing field and prevent companies from outsourcing their emissions to countries with weaker environmental regulations. What are the EU's plans for CBAM going forward?
Well, they're planning to simplify the current system in the first quarter of 2025. And then in the third quarter of 2025, they're going to do a comprehensive review to see if they can expand its scope to cover more sectors and even downstream products. If they decide to go ahead with that expansion, we can expect a legislative proposal in the first quarter of 2026.
So there's a lot happening on the CBAM front in the next few years. It sounds like the EU is taking a multifaceted approach to global engagement, using both partnerships and mechanisms like CBAM to promote sustainable practices beyond its borders.
Exactly. They're trying to use their influence to drive change on a global scale. And Reachlaw, our company, is actually deeply involved in helping businesses navigate the complexities of CBAM. So if you're feeling a bit lost, we're here to guide you.
Great plug.
Thanks.
This has been a really insightful overview of the lead market, circularity, and global aspects of the clean industrial deal, but we've only just scratched the surface. So as promised, we're going to delve into some specific sectors and look at the challenges and opportunities they're facing. Let's start with one that's super crucial to the European economy, automotive. With the shift to electric vehicles, there's a lot of change happening already. What impact will the clean industrial deal have on this sector?
The automotive industry is definitely at a crossroads. The EU is actually set to adopt an industrial action plan for the automotive sector on March 5th. That's coming hot on the heels of the Clean Industrial Deal announcement. This plan will build on the ongoing strategic dialogue they've been having with industry stakeholders and will focus on innovation in future technologies and capabilities.
So they're not just reacting to current trends, they're actively planning for the future.
The EU recognizes that a competitive and innovative automotive industry is vital to the success of the Clean Industrial Deal, and the action plan will likely address the needs of the entire automotive value chain with a strong emphasis on supporting the development and production of electric vehicles.
Big transitions. Let's move on to steel and metals. These are often seen as hard to decarbonize industries. How does the Clean Industrial Deal address this challenge?
The EU knows how important steel and metals are to their economy. They've even referred to them as the backbone of EU industry for centuries. They've launched a strategic dialogue with the steel and metals industry, which actually began on March 4th. The goal is to develop a dedicated action plan outlining specific measures to support these industries in their decarbonization efforts.
It sounds like a collaborative approach.
Yeah.
What are some of the specific hurdles these industries face when it comes to decarbonization?
Well, these are very energy-intensive industries, and their production processes often rely heavily on fossil fuels. Finding alternative low-carbon processes and energy sources is a huge challenge.
And these are global industries.
Mhm.
How does the EU ensure that European companies remain competitive while decarbonizing?
That's a key concern. The EU needs to find a way to support decarbonization without putting European companies at a disadvantage compared to their global competitors. It's a difficult balance to strike.
I imagine the upcoming action plan will shed some light on how they plan to navigate this.
Wow.
Any idea on the timeline for that steel and metals action plan?
We don't have a specific date yet, but it will likely be released in the coming months after the strategic dialogue concludes.
Okay, so more details are on the horizon. Now let's shift gears to the chemicals industry, another vital part of the European economy. What does the Clean Industrial Deal have in store for this sector?
The EU is preparing a chemicals industry package which is expected to be adopted in late 2025. And this package will emphasize the strategic importance of the chemical sector, calling it the industry of industries. It will outline initiatives to enhance the sector's competitiveness, encourage modernization, and support both production and innovation within Europe.
So similar to the automotive and steel industries, the focus is on supporting the industry's transition while making sure it remains competitive globally. What are some of the biggest sustainability challenges facing the chemicals industry?
The chemicals industry is heavily reliant on fossil fuels as feedstocks for many of its processes, and it produces a significant amount of waste. Finding sustainable alternatives to fossil fuels and transitioning to more circular production models are major hurdles.
It seems like this chemicals industry package will be essential in guiding and supporting the sector's journey towards sustainability. Now let's turn our attention to transport, a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. How does the Clean Industrial Deal approach decarbonizing the transport sector?
The EU is developing a sustainable transport investment plan, and this plan will prioritize supporting the development and adoption of renewable and low-carbon fuels for aviation and waterborne transport.
Why the focus on aviation and waterborne transport specifically?
Well, these are sectors that are particularly difficult to decarbonize. They rely heavily on fossil fuels, and there aren't many viable alternatives right now. The EU wants to incentivize the development and adoption of cleaner fuels for these sectors.
It makes sense to focus on the areas that present the biggest challenges. What else will this sustainable transport investment plan cover?
It will also address the rollout of recharging infrastructure for electric vehicles. Expanding the network of charging stations across the EU is critical to making the switch to electric cars more convenient and appealing to consumers.
That's a big undertaking, but it's definitely needed to encourage wider adoption of electric vehicles. Is there a timeline for the sustainable transport investment plan?
The exact timeframe hasn't been announced yet, but it's expected to be released within the next year or so.
Okay, so we can expect to see more concrete plans soon. We've covered automotive steel and metals, chemicals, and transport. Are there any other sectors that are specifically targeted by the Clean Industrial Deal?
Yes. The EU is also developing a bioeconomy strategy, which should be released later this year. And this strategy will focus on using biological resources like crops and wood to produce materials and energy.
How does the bioeconomy fit into the broader goals of the Clean Industrial Deal?
It's a key part of the transition to a more circular and sustainable economy. The EU wants to promote the use of bio-based materials as substitutes for fossil-based materials, thereby reducing dependence on fossil fuels and promoting resource efficiency.
So it's all about finding alternatives and making more sustainable choices. The Clean Industrial Deal certainly covered a lot of ground. Now let's shift our focus to the practical side. How will this plan actually be implemented across all of these different sectors?
The EU is taking a multi-pronged approach. They've laid out a clear timeline for the implementation of their various initiatives. They're also establishing new funding mechanisms like the Industrial Decarbonization Bank to support clean technologies and industrial decarbonization.
And we discussed earlier how they're leveraging public procurement to create lead markets.
Yeah.
But with so many moving parts, how will they ensure that all these initiatives are coordinated and that progress is being made?
The European Commission will have the responsibility of monitoring the progress of the Clean Industrial Deal. They'll be tracking key performance indicators, or KPIs, to assess the effectiveness of the different initiatives. And they'll also publish an annual report on the progress of the Clean Industrial Deal.
So there will be transparency and accountability. That's good to hear. It's a massive undertaking. How are they making sure everyone is on board and working together?
Well, the EU is engaging in extensive dialogue with industry stakeholders, social partners, and civil society. They're holding conferences, workshops, and consultations to gather input and ensure that the Clean Industrial Deal reflects the needs and perspectives of all involved.
It sounds like they're truly committed to making this a collaborative effort.
Yes, they understand that the success of the Clean Industrial Deal depends on everyone working together. It's a shared responsibility. We've covered the main components of the plan and how it will likely impact various sectors.
But let's face it, this is a massive undertaking with some really ambitious goals. What are some of the challenges that could come up along the way?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is the sheer scale and speed of the transformation that's needed. Industries will need to adapt very quickly to new technologies, regulations, and market demands. And that's a lot to ask, especially for those sectors that have been operating in a certain way for decades.
And it's going to be expensive. Decarbonizing these industries requires significant investments in new technologies and infrastructure. Where's all that money going to come from?
Yeah, securing the necessary financing is definitely a key challenge, especially for energy-intensive industries that are already under pressure from global competition. The EU is setting up funding mechanisms and encouraging private investment, but it remains to be seen if this will be enough.
All right, let's talk money. How much are we talking about here?
Big numbers.
Okay.
They estimate the clean transition will require an additional 480 billion euros in annual investment. On top of what's already being spent, that's a massive amount of capital that needs to be mobilized, and the EU knows it.
Whoa, 480 billion euros per year.
Yeah.
That's a lot of zeros. How are they planning to convince investors to open their wallets that wide?
Well, they're pulling out all the stops.
Okay.
First and foremost, they're emphasizing regulatory stability. Investors need to know that the rules of the game won't change on a whim, especially for those long-term capital-intensive investments in clean tech.
Right. Predictability is key when you're talking about those kinds of sums.
Exactly. And they're putting public money on the table to incentivize private investment. Think grants, loans, tax breaks, all designed to make green investments more attractive. They've already mobilized over 100 billion euros to support EU-made clean manufacturing, and that's just the beginning.
So using public funds to prime the pump, so to speak?
Yeah.
But what specific funding mechanisms are available right now?
They've got a few key tools in their arsenal.
Okay.
There's the Innovation Fund, which has a track record of supporting industrial decarbonization and clean tech projects. They're putting 6 billion euros from this fund into clean tech battery manufacturing and industrial decarbonization this year alone.
Okay, so backing those key sectors with serious funding. What else?
They're also proposing a new industrial decarbonization bank, aiming for a whopping 100 billion euros in funding. This bank would act as a one-stop shop for financing industrial decarbonization projects, offering loans, guarantees, and even equity investments.
Wow, another big number.
It is.
So a dedicated bank for clean tech projects, that's a pretty big deal.
It is. And to further sweeten the pot, they're exploring ways to offer additional funding and support for projects that are deemed crucial for EU sovereignty and resilience.
So prioritizing those projects that help reduce the EU's dependence on others makes sense in today's world. But let's be honest, 100 billion euros, even with the innovation fund on top of that, doesn't get you to 480 billion euros annually. How are they going to bridge that gap?
That's where InvestEU comes in. It's the EU's flagship program for attracting private investment. They're planning to increase InvestEU's risk-bearing capacity to mobilize around 50 billion euros in additional financing for key priorities like clean tech manufacturing and energy infrastructure.
So they're really putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to attracting private investment. But what about national governments?
Yeah.
Do they play a role in all this?
Absolutely. And national support, especially in the form of state aid, is crucial for making the clean transition a reality on the ground. The EU is actually introducing a new Clean Industrial Deal state aid framework to make it easier for member states to support green projects without creating unfair competition within the EU.
So a streamlined approach to state aid that aligns with the goals of the Clean Industrial Deal.
Exactly. And they're encouraging member states to use tax policies to create a more favorable business case for clean investments. Think shorter depreciation periods for clean tech assets or targeted tax credits for companies adopting those cutting-edge clean technologies.
So making it financially smarter for companies to go green.
Precisely.
Speaking of competition, a lot of people are concerned about how the EU can ensure that its industries remain competitive globally while pursuing these ambitious sustainability goals. How do they balance those competing priorities?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. The EU needs to walk a tightrope between pushing for sustainability and maintaining the competitiveness of its industries. The carbon border adjustment mechanism is part of their strategy to address this, but it's not a perfect solution, and it's also likely to face pushback from trading partners.
It's clear that there are economic concerns. What about the social implications? As industries transition, there's a risk of job losses, even while new jobs are being created. How does the EU plan to mitigate the impact on workers?
The EU is very aware of this and is emphasizing the concept of a just transition. They're committed to supporting workers through retraining programs and social safety nets. The goal is to make sure that no one is left behind in the transition to a greener economy.
It's good to know that they're taking social equity into account.
Hmm.
Now, shifting our focus beyond the EU, what are the global implications of the Clean Industrial Deal?
Well, the EU's actions have the potential to create a ripple effect around the world. By creating a large market for clean technologies, the EU could help drive down costs globally and accelerate the adoption of sustainable solutions in other regions. So they're essentially setting a standard and hoping others will follow.
So it's not just about Europe. It could catalyze change on a global scale.
Exactly. It could also influence the development of international standards and regulations related to sustainability, shaping the future landscape of global trade.
It's exciting to think about the potential for the EU to set a precedent that other countries will emulate. But to achieve that, innovation will be key. What role will innovation play in realizing the goals of the Clean Industrial Deal?
Innovation is absolutely essential. We need breakthroughs in clean technologies, energy efficiency, circularity, and resource management to make this transition happen. Incremental improvements won't be enough. We need to completely reimagine how we produce, consume, and live.
So it's not just about tweaking existing technologies, it's about fundamentally changing our approach.
Precisely. The EU is investing heavily in research and development to foster innovation in clean technologies, but they can't do it alone. Collaboration is crucial.
What do you mean by collaboration?
We need researchers, businesses, governments, and even citizens working together to drive innovation. Fostering a culture of collaboration and knowledge sharing is essential to unlocking the full potential of these new ideas and solutions.
So to wrap things up, the EU's Clean Industrial Deal is a bold and ambitious plan with the potential to reshape European industry and drive global change.
It's definitely a complex undertaking filled with both challenges and opportunities.
But ultimately, it's a necessary step towards a more sustainable and competitive future for everyone.
The EU is betting big on circularity, clean technologies, and the power of innovation.
It's a bet that, if successful, could have a profound impact on the future of our planet.
It's a future worth striving for. The transition to a sustainable future is a journey we must all take together.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the EU's Clean Industrial Deal. We hope you found it insightful. Stay tuned for more deep dives from Reach Law.